When Morgoth was cast into the void, his once loyal lieutenant Sauron found himself exposed and vulnerable. Without his master's shadow to hide under, Sauron had to rebuild his strength and influence from scratch. But how did he not only survive, but also ascend to become the new Dark Lord of Middle-earth? His rise was marked by strategic manipulation, calculated deceit, and a relentless pursuit of power. Through alliances, betrayals, and sheer willpower, Sauron rose to fill the void left by Morgoth's defeat. Each move he made was carefully planned to exploit the weaknesses of others while solidifying his own strength. How did Sauron evade judgment after Morgoth's defeat? With Morgoth banished to the void, Sauron knew he was a prime target for the Valar's retribution. Instead of fleeing in terror or engaging in futile resistance, he adopted a strategy of feigned repentance. He presented himself before Eönwë, the herald of the Valar, and confessed his sins, claiming to seek redemption. This was no genuine act of remorse. Sauron was buying time and assessing his options. Eönwë, despite sensing some sincerity in Sauron's words, instructed him to return to Valinor to face judgment. But Sauron's pride and fear of humiliation were too great. He chose instead to hide himself in the remote regions of Middle-earth, where he would go unnoticed while he plotted his next move. This clever act of deceit allowed him to avoid immediate confrontation with the Valar and set the stage for his eventual resurgence. When Thangorodrim was broken and Morgoth overthrown, Sauron put on his fair hue again and did obeisance to Eönwë, the herald of Manwë, and abjured all his evil deeds. And some hold that this was not at first falsely done, but that Sauron in truth repented, if only out of fear, being dismayed by the fall of Morgoth and the great wrath of the lords of the West. But it was not within the power of Eönwë to pardon those of his own order, and he commanded Sauron to return to Aman, and there receive the judgment of Manwë. Then Sauron was ashamed, and he was unwilling to return in humiliation, and to receive from the Valar a sentence, it might be, of long servitude in proof of his good faith. For under Morgoth his power had been great. Therefore, when Eönwë departed, he hid himself in Middle-earth, and he fell back into evil, for the bonds that Morgoth had laid upon him were very strong. How did Sauron rebuild his strength in the east? After going into hiding, Sauron knew he had to bide his time before revealing himself again. He chose to establish his power base in the eastern and southern regions of Middle-earth, far from the watchful eyes of the Elves and the Númenorians. Sauron understood that he could not challenge the free peoples directly yet, so he began by influencing and subjugating tribes of men who were still reeling from the wars against Morgoth. He offered them protection and knowledge, gradually turning them into his servants. This allowed him to create a loyal following without drawing unwanted attention. Over time, his influence spread across vast territories, giving him control over the lands and resources he would later use to wage war against the West. Elsewhere, Sauron reigned, and those who would be free took refuge in the fastnesses of wood and mountain, and ever fear pursued them. In the east and south, well nigh all men were under his dominion, and they grew strong in those days, and built many towns and walls of stone, and they were numerous and fierce in war and armed with iron. To them, Sauron was both king and god, and they feared him exceedingly, for he surrounded his abode with fire. How did Sauron deceive the elves as Annatar? One of Sauron's most brilliant moves was to adopt the guise of Annatar, the Lord of Gifts. He presented himself as a bringer of knowledge and wisdom, offering to help the elves enhance their own power. This guise was especially effective among the elven smiths of Eregion, led by Celebrimbor. Sauron exploited the elves' desire to preserve their lands and people, presenting his aid as a gift of preservation. His knowledge of ringcraft impressed the elves, and he soon became a trusted advisor. However, his true intention was far darker. He guided them in the creation of the Rings of Power, each of which was linked to the One Ring that he forged in secret. His aim was to control all the other ring-bearers through the One Ring. This elaborate scheme was nearly successful, but when Sauron put on the One Ring, the elves sensed his malevolent presence and removed their own rings, foiling his plan to dominate them directly. Men he found the easiest to sway of all the peoples of the earth. But long he sought to persuade the elves to his service, for he knew that the firstborn had the greater power, and he went far and wide among them, and his hue was still that of one both fair and wise. Only to Lindon he did not come, for Gil-galad and Elrond doubted him and his fair seeming. and though they knew not who in truth he was, they would not admit him to that land. But elsewhere the elves received him gladly, and few among them hearkened to the messengers from Lindon bidding them beware. For Sauron took to himself the name of Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, and they had at first much profit from his friendship. Did Sauron establish his power in Mordor? Surrounded by mountain ranges, Mordor was a natural fortress. After the elves saw through his deception, Sauron fled to Mordor, a land he had chosen for its strategic advantages. Within its borders, Sauron built the mighty Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower, and established his new dominion. From this stronghold, he could gather his armies and prepare for war without fear of immediate retaliation. Mordor's harsh terrain and proximity to Mount Doom made it the perfect location for Sauron to forge the One Ring and launch his campaigns of conquest. Establishing himself in Mordor also allowed him to fortify his power base and expand his influence to the lands of Rhûn and Harad, where he recruited new followers and forged alliances with those who sought power or feared his might. He came in secret, as has been told, to his ancient kingdom of Mordor beyond the Elf-dûr, the Mountains of Shadow, and that country marched with Gondor upon the east. There, above the valley of Gorgoroth, was built his fortress, vast and strong, Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower, and there was a fiery mountain in that land that the elves named Orod Ruin. Indeed, for that reason, Sauron had set there his dwelling long before, for he used the fire that welled there from the heart of the earth in his sorceries and in his forging. And in the midst of the land of Mordor, he had fashioned the ruling ring. How did Sauron corrupt Númenor from within? When Sauron saw that the might of Númenor surpassed even his own, he resorted to manipulation. He allowed himself to be taken captive by the Númenorian king, Ar-Pharazôn. Once in Númenor, Sauron quickly rose from prisoner to the king's most trusted advisor. He used his charisma and cunning to turn the Númenorians against the Valar, convincing them that the only way to achieve immortality was to wage war on the Undying Lands. This ultimately led to Númenor's downfall as they attempted to assail Valinor, bringing about the wrath of the Valar and the drowning of Númenor. Sauron's manipulation not only eliminated a powerful adversary, but also weakened the realms of men in Middle-earth, paving the way for his return to power. And Sauron came. Even from his mighty tower of Barad-dûr he came, and made no offer of battle. For he perceived that the power and majesty of the kings of the sea surpassed all rumor of them, so that he could not trust even the greatest of his servants to withstand them. And he saw not his time yet to work his will with the Dunedain. And he was crafty, well skilled to gain what he would by subtlety, when force might not avail. Therefore he humbled himself before Ar-Pharazôn and smoothed his tongue, and men wondered, for all that he said seemed fair and wise. How did Sauron rebuild his power after the fall of Númenor? When Númenor was destroyed, Sauron's physical form was lost, but his spirit endured. Even without a physical body, he retained command over his armies and continued to spread his influence. He returned to Middle-earth as a shadow of his former self, taking refuge once more in Mordor. He rebuilt Barad-dûr and launched new campaigns to assert his dominion over the remaining free peoples. His spirit's survival, despite catastrophic losses, demonstrated his resilience and deep-seated malice. This new phase of his existence made him more dangerous, as he sought not just to conquer, but to corrupt and destroy all who opposed him. But Sauron was not of mortal flesh, and though he was robbed now of that shape in which he had wrought so great an evil, so that he could never again appear fair to the eyes of men, yet his spirit arose out of the deep, and passed as a shadow and a black wind over the sea, and came back to Middle-earth and to Mordor that was his home. Sauron's rise to power after Morgoth's defeat was not a straightforward conquest, but a series of calculated moves designed to exploit the weaknesses of his enemies and secure his own position. From feigning repentance and avoiding judgment to manipulating the elves and corrupting Númenor from within, every step Sauron took demonstrated his strategic brilliance. His establishment in Mordor and his return after Númenor's fall solidified his role as the Dark Lord of Middle-earth. Despite repeated defeats, Sauron's resilience and malice ensured that he would remain a threat until the very end. His story is a testament to his unparalleled skill in turning every setback into an opportunity for domination. But while Sauron's shadow loomed over Middle-earth, There was another figure rising to meet the challenge, the long-lost heir of Isildur, Aragorn. His journey from a ranger in the wilds to the king who united men against Sauron's tyranny was pivotal in shaping the outcome of the War of the Ring. Click the video on screen now to learn about Aragorn's story and how his courage and leadership played a crucial role in the downfall of the Dark Lord.